Why don't we start out, Liz, with you just introducing yourself
Okay.
and tell us who you are and what your initial involvement with the World War II era was.
Okay. My name's Elizabeth Wall Strohfus. I'm from Faribault, Minnesota. I started flying back in 1942, practically the dark ages, and I had a great mentor of some great fellas that helped me start flying. And I didn't realize at the time, but when I took my first flight, it was love at first flight. I knew I had to fly airplanes because it was something that I really enjoyed doing. So we were very fortunate. We heard that there was a program called Women's Air Force Service Pilots. Jacqueline Cochran was the director of flying, and they needed women to come and take the men's flying positions so that they could be sent to combat. So during the years 1943 and 1944, our women did 85% of all the aviation training done in our country, and we did 89% of all the ferrying done in our country for the military. We flew every type of aircraft the military had, up to and including the B-29. And 3 of our girls could fly the B-29. I wasn't lucky enough to get in the B-29, but I did co-pilot the B-17, which I was happy to be a part of. We had training in Sweetwater, Texas, as I say, and the Avenger Field was and is the only all-girl airfield in the world. When the fellows went in as cadets, they'd go to one field for their primary training, another for their basic, and another for their advanced flying. But and at the time, being the first program, they weren't sure that women could handle the military aircraft. So they kind of kept us a secret on the one field. And so we did all of our training from the one field, the primary, the basic and advanced, all at one field. So that's why they called it Cochran's Convent, because she wouldn't allow men to come in the field. And at a time when men in the area heard there were women pilots flying their aircraft, they really had to come and take a look at us. So all of a sudden, overhead, they'd run out of gas, or their plane would quit working right over Avenger Field, and so they'd have to land to see what our women looked like. But they couldn't let them land there anymore. If they had an emergency, they had to go to an auxiliary field because it got pretty crowded. But that was okay. And then again, we wore what they call zoot suits that were left over from the men cadets. There again, they did not want to waste money on any of the uniforms because they were not sure that we were going to be able to handle the plane. And so when our gals were ferrying planes cross country, we just had khaki slacks and white blouses and an overseas hat. And when they'd take a plane to a certain area, they'd have to carry their parachute with them back to the field where they started from. And some of the gals get picked up by the MPs saying that they stole government property. So they would have to go in and they'd call the commander of the field and say, send those girls back, we need to get the planes ferried to a different part. So we did fill in a time when it was really needed, and we were very, very grateful for the opportunity to fly those beautiful airplanes. When I got my wings, want to ask me something, or do you want me to
continue? Keep going. I'll jump in when okay. Necessary.
When I got my wings, Sweetwater, Texas, I tell you, I was the happiest gal alive. As you can see, the wings have a diamond shape in the center, and that signifies womanhood. The men had the shield, and that signified manhood. But today the wings are the same, because the plane doesn't ask, are you male or female? It says, can you handle me?
Mm-hmm. Were you guys commissioned, or were you a rated enlistment, a flight-rated enlistment class?
Well, we were a very, very different type people in the service. We went in as civil services, but we went in with the understanding that we were to be a part of the military. We took the oath of the military. We were under orders at all time. We did what we were told. We flew the aircraft. We lived in barracks, and we were under those restrictions at all times. And we did everything the military did, the marching and the calisthenics and all. But they never got around to take us into the military. The war was on, and so we did our jobs that we were intended to do. At the time, there were 25,000 women who did apply for this organization. 1,870 were taken into the organization, but 1,074 is all that graduated with their wings. There were some that were washed out. And, well, and then the sad part of that was we were always going to be militarized, but you see the private sector of the insurance company wouldn't insure us. I don't know why getting shot at was too dangerous, but they wouldn't insure us. And the government wouldn't insure us because as of yet they said we were not a part of the military for the government. And so we had no insurance. But we were young and nothing was going to happen to us. But we did have 38 of our women killed in the service in serving our country, and they were not recognized as veterans, which was sad. No flag in their coffin, no star in the window signifying someone had died in service of our country. And if the family couldn't afford to get the bodies home, why the girls would put money together to see the bodies got home. That was kind of sad. I am so glad I lived long enough to get recognized and tell my story, so that I'm very grateful. And I love to tell my story because it is not in history books. And I like them to know. In fact, what had happened in the 70s, some gals were started flying military aircraft when we had that situation down in Panama. And big headlines, first women to fly military aircraft. And we, oh, no, they're not. So some of us went to Washington, they had hearings, and it proved, one of the girls was even court-martialed. You know, how can you be court-martialed if you're not a part of the military?
That's true.
So we proved that the orders that we had still had our papers from that service, and so we proved that we were to be a part of the military. And so it passed it in 1978, but in November 1979, I was a member of the Army Air Force and very proud to be. So we were veterans at that time.
Good. How old were you when you enlisted in the WASP?
I was 22.
22. Had you gone to college, or were you just?
Who could afford to go to college those days? We had 6 in our family, and my father was older. He was a retired farmer when he married Mother, and he had quite a bit of money. He bought a house, and then the crash came in 1929, and he lost the money that he did have, and he had 6 children, and he had a family to support. So we all went through high school, which even in those days was something to get through 12th grade, the 6 of us in the family. And as soon as we got out of school, we went to work so that we would bring money home.
When did you start learning to fly?
In 1942.
Okay. When you were in the WASPs or before?
You had to have at least 35 hours of flying time before you could enter the program. Either 35 hours of flying time or a private license. Well, I never waited around for a private license. I got my 35 hours of flying time and head down to Texas. And because I thought everybody should fly, I had my sister Mary, God bless her, and my friend Kay Murphy, the 3 of us. And from 1,800 people, we had 3 of us from Faribault, Minnesota, and I thought that's something for the amount of people.
For the size of the town, yeah.
The size of the town was only 15,000 at the time. My sister Mary never made it through. She only went through primary because she liked to fly straight and level, and she did not like to do acrobatics. So we had to do acrobatics and basic. So, which was wonderful. She was so much better in ground school than I, but I loved to fly, and yeah, it was very important for me to do lots of acrobatics.
Now, did they give the WASP the same flight training that male pilots received, or was it a different program entirely?
It might have been a little faster because we were so needed. And see, the men didn't have any prior training. They were brought in and when they started in the primary training, a lot of them didn't have any prior training. And our women had to have at least 35 hours of flying time. So at least we do the controls and knew they wouldn't get sick in the air. Well, you know, that's important. Yeah, that's important. Well, then with our uniforms, when we finally had a little problem, we wore these old zoot suits. We didn't care. They were so big for us, but we'd roll them up, tuck them in, you know. We'd make them fit. But finally, in the latter part of 1943, Jacqueline Cochran said, well, now our women have proven that we can fly airplanes. And for the girls who did a lot of ferrying, it was very important for them to have the uniform to show that they were a part of the military, even though by that time we were still just civilians, what do you call that? Civil service. We were part of the civil service at that time, with thinking that we were always going to be in the military the next week, you know. But then what happened, when I received my wings, am I too long?
Oh, no, you're doing fine.
Okay. When I received my wings, at that time, being that we had so few gals, we were asked where we'd like to go. And so I said I wanted to fly pursuit aircraft. And so I was sent, there were 10 of us, sent to Las Vegas Army Airfield. And I was training gunners. And I'd either be in a plane flying down diving on the formation of B-17s, and they'd shoot at us with camera guns, or else I was flying in a B-26 as co-pilot. We had a big long tow rope and then a sleeve behind that, and they'd shoot at that with actual ammunition. And that was mostly the training I did. Well, then they needed an instrument instructor, so I went back and got a advanced instrument course so I could teach instrument flying from the field, because a lot of those pilots from Las Vegas were on their way overseas, so they needed more instrument flying. I was really very blessed to be able to fly these airplanes and to do what I did during World War II. I was very grateful for the opportunity. It just broke our hearts when they said, December 20th, 1944, thank you, girls, now you can go home and lead a normal life, which was not easy.
A big change. So they disbanded the WACs before the end of the war?
WASPs.
WASPs, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, before the end of the war, that's really hurt us because, 44, the war was still on. Mm-hmm. And, but then, you see, by that time, there were enough men who had their flight time in overseas, their missions in overseas, and to keep their flight pay, they had to get their flight time in, so they took over our training and our ferrying, so they could get their, and that was why we went into the service. So, of course, we left. And it was tough. I went to Northwest Airlines. I had flown to B-17 and B-26 as co-pilot. I'd flown P-39 little Bel Air Cobra, and the D-86 BT and all the rest of the airplanes. And so it was very, very upsetting to me that I couldn't do it, and also an instrument card. So you see, I thought, pursuits, the 4 inches, the 2 inches, the instrument, I mean, how can they not want me? I mean, I'm the hottest pilot alive. You didn't think so, just ask me. So I went to Northwest Airlines and asked them to please be one of their pilots. Well, they said, thank you very much, and we're really impressed with your resume, but no, we cannot use you as a pilot. They said they don't hire women pilots, but they would like me in their front office. Well, I told them what they could do with their front office. But later on, they had me come over and give a program over at Northwest Airlines, and I thought, boy, here's my chance. 55 years later. Yeah. So I went over there at that big NATCO building, and they really rolled out the red carpet for me. Terry Marsh took me through these simulators they have today, the 747, 200, and the 400. I did a slow roll on the 200. All the way down, but it was wonderful. He let me fly through the IDS tower. Of course, then we backed up again, I did all the things you weren't supposed to do. But anyway, that's the way it was. And I really appreciated what they did for me. And then I got out in front of them all, and then I told them, well, I forgave them for what they did to me 55 years ago, because I'm the only one there. They're either dead or retired. But anyway, I appreciated their doing what they did for me, and I really enjoy telling my story. Mostly I like to go to the children because I want them to know their horizons are unlimited today. Not just the girls, but the boys. There's so much out there for them. And they're really not taking the advantage, and they're not taking the opportunities that are available to them. How we had to fight to do what we did, and to know what they could do. The ROTC programs, CAP programs. I've been to a lot of their organizations, and it's so wonderful to see those young people So I know that our future is going to be good with those children.
So apparently there's an interesting story about you deciding to fly a T-6 instead of getting married.
Well, when I tell my story, I saw this AT-6 and I tell them I had a love affair with the AT-6. It was between basic and advanced flying. I had a boyfriend back home, and he was a flying farmer, and he did own an airplane. And he came down and he said, well, now you saw you can fly these airplanes, you know, there's no reason to go on. Why don't you come on home now, we'll get married and raise a family. And I don't know, I sure like to fly airplanes. Well, after 2 days, he kept talking to me, so I thought, well, maybe I would go home. He did have an airplane. So I went in and told my director of flying, I said, Miss Deaton, I'm going to resign. And she gets out all my papers. Now, ground school was really tough for me. Not having been to college, as I say, in ground school, I thought physics was something you took for a stomachache. I didn't know it was something you had to learn. All the meteorology and engines and all, it was really tough. But I knew if I wanted to fly airplanes, I had to do that ground school. So she said, well, you're past your ground school. Oh, you're doing so great in your flying. What do you want to quit for? I said, well, my boyfriend wants me to come home and get married. And I said, he does have an airplane, so I can fly around a little bit. And she said, well, that's understandable. And of course, this is your wishes. But before you go, you have to have a ride in this next plane that's the advanced flying. So I got a ride in the AT-6 the next day. I couldn't wait to get out of that airplane. I had to go to the phone, call that boy up and said, oh, I'm not coming home. He said, if you don't come home, I'm going to go home, marry someone else. I said, you go right ahead, and we both lived happily ever after.
What was your favorite airplane from the World War II era that you flew? What was your favorite of the bunch?
I think the AT-6 was. I felt the one that I was really in control of. P-39 was fun, but I felt more in control of the AT-6. And the bombers were great, but being co-pilot, I'd rather be in control.
So did you spend after training, did you spend your entire time out at the airfield in Las Vegas, or did they move you to different duty stations?
No, my whole training, I did some ferrying from Las Vegas, but I mostly did training at the gunnery school at Las Vegas. That was most of it. In fact, I didn't even know what our other girls had done until we've been having our meetings and stories about them. And it's very interesting. They've all done such wonderful things, and I was just really proud of our girls and what they did when they were in the service.
Did the Wasps, did the aircraft come into a central collection location, or were they sent out to the plants, accepted the aircraft there, and then ferried them to other locations?
The girls were sent to the field where the planes were, okay. And then they ferried the planes wherever they were needed. In fact, the P-47s, our women pilots flew every P-47 that came off that line. And my friend Teresa James, I'll never forget the big story about her. She flew the 10,000 P-47 off the line. Yeah, and she ferried it, and she's a good friend of mine. They're all good friends of mine.
So how did the F-16 flight you have stack up to the old prop jobs?
I tell you, it was a thrill, but I'm not sorry. After I got the flight, the fellows in the F-16 said, don't you think that you'd rather be young now that you could fly the F-16s? First I said yes, and then I said no. Aren't I fortunate to be able to do the old aircraft with the props and all, and then come forward and do the F-16 ride? I wouldn't trade my life, not a day of it. But anyway, I was at the home and field, and my friend Ray Kozlowski was there with his gorgeous F-16. And Eugene Andreotti, the Adjutant General of the Air National Guard, was on the podium with me. I love to talk, you could probably tell. And we were talking about the planes and all, and he said, say, have you ever been in an F-16? I said, been in one. I said, you wouldn't even let me near one. And at that time, women were not allowed to be flying in the pursuit aircraft. And so he said, well, would you like to fly an F-16? Would I like to fly an F-16? So he said, go home, write me a letter. Well, I wrote him a letter, and I didn't hear for 2 weeks. And then he called. And he said, well, when would you like to fly on the F-16? I said, is tomorrow too soon? Anyway, they arranged it, and so he had said, well, I tell you, he said, not only, when I called, I got a call from the Pentagon, they said, well, not only was I 71 years old, I was a woman. And after all, women weren't flying in that type aircraft. And he said, do you think this person, I'm sure he said old lady, but he told me person. And he said, do you think this person could handle a flight in an F-16? And my friend, the general, said, I don't know anybody who can handle it better. Not a God if it killed me. It was a wonderful experience. I went over here to the Duluth Air National Guard, and they treated me so beautifully, and they decked me all out. And Tim Cassalter, Ray was going to fly me, but he would be the commander. He couldn't. But Tim Cassalter flew me in this gorgeous plane, and when we took off, before we took off, we had all the media there because I think they thought I wouldn't make it up the up the ladder. Anyway, they were there watching and taking pictures, and they said, what are you going to do with this person in the air? And he says, oh, I'll fly her straight and level. So 20,000 feet, just like that. And he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, you said this baby could fly, show me, and he did. Oh, it was a wonderful experience. I'll be forever grateful to that group of fellows over there for what they did for me. It was a wonderful experience. Of course, I told them before we took off, I said, well, heck, it only took 19 minutes from Minneapolis to Duluth. I said, I got a couple of days. Let's take a flight around the world. Tim just smiled. But we did everything. He told me we did everything as if I were a pilot checking out. And then he said, next time, except for refueling, he says, we'll do that next time. I said, when? Anyway, I was just really grateful for that beautiful, beautiful flight. It was an experience. I never felt better in my whole life. Yeah, never. It was just wonderful. And I love the way they take care of our boys with all this pack on their back, 35 pounds. And all the, the ropes and the knives and the little rubber raft and the paddle to shore and get stuck in a tree, cut yourself down. It's just wonderful what they take care of our boys and the food that keeps you going. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm very grateful.
Okay. Let's back up for just a little bit. Do you remember where you were when you first heard either about the bombing at Pearl Harbor or President Roosevelt's address to the Congress after the bombing?
Yes, I do. I was at home with my family, and I was with my boyfriend, who in later years became my husband and the father of my 5 children. And we had just come back from a walk. I thought it was a story. I did not believe it. I did not believe it at first until the president said, and made his big statement saying that time will go down. Excuse me, but I forgot what it was already, but I remember it very well. Yeah. And I remember it because the boy I was going with, he enlisted the next day. He felt that was his duty to go in right away. And many, many of our young men did that right away. I'm so proud of the group of people we had. I never saw such patriotism as we had back there. Of course, thank God there hasn't been a war like that. But the patriotism was so wonderful to see our boys to go out and save our country.
Did you? How were the WASPs received by the male military pilots at the time? Did they pay a lot of attention to you guys? Did they ignore you? Did they treat you as second-class pilots?
Well, some of the girls had stories to tell, but I have to say, as soon as we got to a field, as I went to Las Vegas, we were. The chief pilot checked us out, and I can understand that. Well, they wanted to be sure we could handle the planes we were going to fly. But once they found out that we could handle any aircraft that we got into or they asked us to fly, and they saw that we could handle it, I was really treated with great respect. I never had any problems. They were very good friends of mine. Some of the girls have some kind of sad stories, but I didn't. I got along fine.
That's good. Did you have any interesting experiences while you were flying with the WASPs, or any close calls, or any unique equipment failures? Did you have to bring a B-17 or as a co-pilot in due to an engine failure, or have any hydraulic problems, or?
No, sometimes they'd say the hydraulics aren't working and I had to crank the wheels down. I think they just wanted to see if I could do it. I did. It wasn't easy. But no, I didn't. I had a few things happen, but I never felt that it was any crisis. And my only problem was I wanted to get that plane down safe. I never really had any problem.
Is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to bring out, or any part of your story you haven't told yet that you feel is important?
Don't ask.
Well, we got 6 hours of videotape. So.
No, I've got a lot of stories, but I don't want to. I'm really appreciative of being able to tell my story, because the more people I think that hear it will realize that there were women flying back in the dark ages. And I'm just glad that we are being remembered, because we did fly and did our best during World War II, and it's nice to be remembered as such. And coming Memorial Day, it's a wonderful time to be a veteran. I enjoy wearing my uniform, and then they ask me about my uniform, and I love to tell them. Of course, the greatest thing was somebody asked me if I were on furlough. That made me feel really good. Being only 80 years old, that isn't too bad.
Well, they give you a lot of time and grade and quite a bit of flight pay, if that,
Oh boy, I tell you.
What did you do other than apply to Northwest Airlines after the civil service or the government released you? After you went to Northwest, what else did you do?
It was tough. I had about 15 jobs in 1 month. I did all kinds of. I wound motors for a while for a friend of mine who fixed motors. I even taught archery to some Hollywood starlets out in California. I worked for Firestone Tire Rubber Company, and there was going to be an air race, and so I went into Mr. Firestone and I said, I want to be your pilot, because you get any kind of plane you want and I'll fly it and I'll win that race for you. Well, he already had a man pilot, so he didn't need me. So I didn't stay there long. I just went from one thing to another. And then I went to aircraft communications, and the only reason they let me in is because I had a commercial rating. They did not want women in that service. But now it's great that they're able to do those things if they want to do them. And then I came home and got married and had 5 children in 5.5 years. So you know what I did for a few years.
Okay.
I've been very lucky. And then I did lose my dear husband in 1969 during the Vietnam War, and it was really rough. But if I didn't have my faith in God and my family and friends, I could never have made it. But God was good to me. I said before, I wouldn't trade one day of my life. I've been very blessed. I have such wonderful friends. My friend Ray Kozlowski there, he's just such a wonderful person. And you're so lucky to have him here at the airport, I'll tell you. Yeah, he's a great person.
Did you eventually buy a private aircraft, or did you just keep flying through like Civil Air Patrol? And
I flew for Civil Air Patrol, and I flew privately, and I couldn't get a job where I could feel that I could keep a plane. It was very expensive, so I just rented planes to fly during those years that I could. Before I got married and had a family, then my husband would let me fly for a while. I belong to the 99 group of women pilots. They're an international group of women pilots, and they great group of women. I would fly with them. Now I belong to the Civil Air Patrol, and I belong to the 8th Air Force and the Aviation Association, and I'm just having such a good time. Women in aviation, and almost every organization there is in aviation, I try to be a member, because I really appreciate what they're doing to promote aviation.
About how many speaking engagements do you do a year now?
Well, it ranges between, my lowest year was 35, 50, 55.
Well, I keep you busy. All over the country, or just?
I've been to 22 states. Yeah. I love to tell my story, and as I say, to speak to children. Last evening I was at Ray's group of EAA members over at the airport. It was great. Oh, I love that audience. They were right here with me. I tell you, when you tell your stories and they're right there and they understand what you're saying, it's a great. But I spoke to teachers and kids from kindergarten on up, and I really had a great rapport with all the children. They've been great. In fact, 3 weeks ago I was down at Dubuque, Iowa for 4 days with Paul Tibbetts and Bob Martin, who is another Tuskegee Airman. I admire those Tuskegee Airmen. They really they got kind of a raw deal, but I'm glad they're being recognized today and given the recognition that they really deserve.
Okay. I think that's it, Liz. I've run out of questions, but thank you for answering them and participating in this with us.
Okay, it's been a pleasure. I said all you gotta do is tell me when to quit.
Oh, we can keep going if you want.
No.
Well,
Well,
I think we're done.
okay.
Yep. Just got one short form I need you to fill out to keep the lawyers happy.
Oh, yes, isn't it terrible today?